Let's talk about the GRE Quantitative Reasoning section and the Masters in Business Analytics program at UT. So, unfortunately, this is just one of the requirements that we have in place. Now, we use your GRE score for a pretty good purpose, even though if you're graduating with a business analytics major, we're pretty confident that you are going to be a great analytics practitioner in the future. And the main thing that we use it for is helping to divvy out assistantships. So, when you take the quantitative reasoning score, that gives you a bit of an idea for what sort of assistantship and support you might be looking at. So, on average, the students that end up joining the program have an average around about 70th percentile for the GRE quantitative score. And the higher that gets, well, the better the chances are that you'll get 2 semesters of assistantship. So around the 80th percentile or so, or even higher, that starts to really start raising our eyebrows and get us excited to maybe offer you additional support. And it works the other way around too. If your score is a bit on the low side, then very often it's going to be difficult in getting you even 1 semester of assistantship. So it all comes down to the quantitative reasoning section. We don't really look at the verbal scores, the analytical writing scores. Now, don't blow those off and get like 5th percentile. That's going to raise some red flags. But we're really mostly focused on that quantitative reasoning score. So we use it mostly in order to divvy out those assistantships. And so there's a pretty hefty financial incentive for doing well. So how do the assistantships work? Well, when you're given an assistantship, you are usually a TA for Stat 201, BAS 320, 474, 479, etc. And what that assistantship covers is about $5,700 a semester. It's essentially a tuition waiver. If you're out of state, it's the $14,000 for out-of-state tuition. And when you break that down by how much effort you should probably put into studying for this exam, it's a really nice payoff. So if you spend about 20 hours of prep work studying and practicing for the GRE Quant section, that's equivalent to essentially paying yourself about $285 an hour here. So from a financial point of view, it's really in your best interest to do as well as you can on the GRE. Try to get those 2 semesters of support if possible, or at least lock in 1 semester of assistantship. So that poses the question, all right, what's going to be the best strategy for coming up with the best score possible? And unfortunately, it's a bit of a challenge. Why is this? Well, the creators of the GRE Quant section test a very specific type of math and a math that most likely you haven't used for quite a few years. So the topics on the GRE math are very similar to the topics that you saw on the ACT or the SAT. The topics are restricted to what would be taught in high school. So high school math, high school statistics, basically anything up through a second course in algebra is fair game. You won't see calculus questions or really more advanced questions than that. It's back to high school math. Now, most likely it's been 3 or more years since you really got into this sort of math, so even if you were good with it back then, you're going to be rusty and you're actually going to have to review and practice quite a bit to get those skills back to where they were when you were a junior or a senior in high school. So how are you going to go about doing that? Well, let's take a look at a list of the topics that are typically tested on the GRE Quant section. And what you see is really just a blast from the past. It's really old stuff like arithmetic, looking at numbers that are prime numbers, looking at remainders, exponents, square roots, looking at percentages and ratios, and basic topics in algebra. So what makes a function a function? What do they look like when you graph it? Can you solve a pair of simultaneous equations for x and y? Can you solve just an ordinary quadratic equation for x? You know, that quadratic formula. And they even have a lot of questions about geometry. Now, your guess is as good as mine as to why they feel that this skill is still important, but we're stuck with it. So you're going to have to drag out those old skills about looking at triangles and angles and remembering how to do the Pythagorean theorem, looking at parallel perpendicular lines, areas of circles, stuff that you haven't thought about for a really long time, but that it really pays to go back and review, especially if you can push up that score to a nice level. Now, the one bit of good news is that there are questions about data analysis that you're going to be pretty good at no matter what. So going through 201, 320, 474, etc., you're very much in tune with what the GRE people are interested in asking. So basic descriptive statistics like the mean, the median, the mode, looking at the normal distribution, bar graphs, pie charts, kind of interpreting a scatter plot, things like this. They do tend to ask some pure probability questions, and if you haven't taken BIS 471, it's going to be a good idea to review just some of the basic rules about how probability works, how it's calculated, how you count up combinations of events occurring. But there's plenty of resources out there to help you go through some of these main topics and how to review for them. So, if you're going to be joining us for the Masters in Business Analytics program, I highly recommend you get as much assistance as possible by boosting this score as high as possible. So, what would I recommend as your main strategy? Well, unfortunately, there's no easy way around this. You're just going to have to study and practice really quite a bit. If the night before your scheduled exam you say, all right, let me spend just a couple hours reviewing some of the major topics, doing some review questions, that's really not going to help make your score increase all that much. Really, the only time and tested proven way to boost the score on the GRE exam is just through rigorous practice over quite an extended period of time. So my suggestion would be take about 2 weeks to do this studying and practicing. Spend maybe an hour and a half a day doing some practice problems, going over some of the topics, making sure you're absolutely clear on how these various aspects of math works. And with that much practice, I think about, how does that work out to be? About 20 hours, I think, what I'd quoted before. I think you should be in a pretty good position to have your score be substantially higher than what it would have been if you didn't do any of that prep. So how are you going to go about doing that? What are the best resources? Well, the book that I've been using to review what's in the GRE and to see what sort of questions are being asked now is just the official book from ETS itself. So they'll sell a complete package where they go over all the different sections of the exam. You really only need to look at the one that goes over the quantitative reasoning section. So you can get this off ETS, you can get it off Amazon, you can get a digital version, a hard copy, etc. And it's really not all that bad. It's only $20 from ETS itself. You might be able to find that cheaper used, but it's a pretty good resource. So there's an extensive set of practice problems and exercises. There are detailed explanations about how you should be working through some of these problems. And there's even a brief review of the main topics in math that you'd find on the GRE. Now, it's very dense. It's not like something you can just sit down and read like a book, but it provides a very nice compact compendium for what those major topics are that allows you to very quickly identify, hey, I really don't remember much about quadratic equations. So once you've identified maybe some weak points, or if you want some tips about reviewing certain topics, where do you go? Well, the nice thing is that the ETS website itself, just ets.org, you can see the address here up at the top of the page. They actually list where the videos provided by the Khan Academy go over some of these topics. Now, if you've never used the Khan Academy before, it's a fantastic resource for reviewing basic math concepts that really were taught in high school. They're not the most useful for a lot of college math, but it's a fantastic resource for this GRE type of math. And so what ETS is giving you is a list of topics and then some links for, okay, well, where is this covered in the Khan Academy? This is much better than trying to track down these topics in a textbook. And when you go to the Khan Academy, it's actually kind of fun. They try to make it like a video game where you work through various exercises. You get points, you level up. It's basic math. It's hard to make it fun, but they're doing their best to make it as engaging as possible, and I definitely applaud them for that. So it's not that bad getting some practice in reviewing some of those key topics, and that should serve you well in filling in some of the weak points that you have identified as to where you could use some additional practice. Now, as for the test itself, most likely you're going to take it on a computer, and the way this is going to work is mixed in with the other sections, the verbal, the analytical writing sections. You'll have 2 sections for the quantitative reasoning, and they're relatively short, just 35 minutes per section and 20 minutes. You will have access to a calculator, kind of an awkward one. It's an on-screen calculator, not the easiest to use, so don't show up to the exam thinking that you can use your iPhone as a calculator or even your trusted TI 40 or 82, whatever those numbers were. So there's a calculator, but it's awkward. Just be prepared that, okay, calculation's going to be a little bit annoying. Now, what kind of questions can you expect? Well, there's a pretty good mix of just pure math problems, like solve this equation for x, do this exponent, do this factorization, and some word problems where you'll be translating some sort of context, a story problem, into mathematical expressions. And you don't have to do them one by one. If you find a hard problem, you can mark it, you can skip it, you can come back to it a bit later, which is actually a really good strategy. Focus on the easy points first. Now, the one thing is if you're going to be taking that GRE on a computer, they employ these adaptive questions. Now, what that means is that the questions you end up being presented actually depend a bit on how you've been doing on the test so far. So future questions you're going to see depend on how well you've done on the test so far. And my main bit of advice with this is don't get discouraged. I've talked to plenty of people that have taken the GRE and their hearts kind of sink as they get 7, 8, 9, 10 questions into a quantitative section and the questions start looking really easy to them. So this is the one big thing about math is that difficulty, what's easy and what's hard, is extremely subjective. What you find to be very difficult, other people might find very easy, and also vice versa. So don't gauge how well you're doing on the section so far based on the types of questions you're seeing and how hard or easy you think they are. Our gauges aren't all that great with what ETS thinks is a hard or easy question. So just chug right on through it. Go through each question. Don't get discouraged if you start thinking that, hey, this is the easy part of the exam. I must have bombed the first few. That's not how it works. Just proceed as normal. So overall, best strategy, and you can find other resources like Kaplan and some other test prep places that give some advanced strategy, but overall, the way you want to approach taking this test is pretty much like any other test you've taken as an undergraduate. When you run into a hard problem, skip it and come back to it. There's no penalty for guessing, and all of the weights for each question are exactly the same. So you might as well spend most of your time making sure you're getting those points on questions that you know how to do. Get all those easy points out of the way first, and then once there's time, go back and revisit the ones that you think are a little bit harder, the ones that you had to skip over. If you can't get it, just make sure you answer everything, since there is that no penalty for guessing. And just to give you an idea of some of the questions you might be able to see, make sure you get enough practice before showing up. You can just Google for quantitative reasoning practice questions. And there's a pretty good variety. Overall, there's 4 types of questions you can expect. One of which is these comparison questions, where you're given 2 quantities, A and B, and you have to figure out, all right, which of these 2 quantities is larger? Is it always A? Is it always B? Are they always exactly equal? Or can you not determine the relationship, which one is bigger, from the information provided? And so I like these sorts of questions because it really kind of tests the way you think about a problem in addition to just your knowledge of basic maths. And there's some great strategies in the textbooks that you can read about on how to approach these problems. But for me, I can very quickly identify that, hey, there's no way we can tell which one is going to be bigger, because I noticed that if we were to plug in, say, -4 for x and y into both of these equations, quantity A is going to be 0, because x being -4 plus 4, that becomes 0. Quantity B is going to be 0 as well, because if y is -4, we're going to get a 0 over there. So if x and y are both -4, then these quantities are both equal. But if x is -4 and y is something different, well, x -4, quantity A is always going to be 0. Depending on what we plug in for y, quantity B might be a lot bigger, or it might be a lot smaller. So there's no way we can really determine the relationship. Plug in a -5 for y on the right, you got the product of 2 positive or negative numbers. That's a positive, bigger than 0. If you plug in a positive number for y, like 1, you would get a 5 times a -1, x being -4. So no way to tell. Kind of fun sorts of questions. Hard questions, though. The other type of question are just the multiple choice. There's one correct answer, and you're going to want to select the one that's right, the best one at least. So reading the problem, translating that into a little bit of math, doing some calculation, just one correct answer. And they also have some questions where you select all the correct answers. They'll give you a series of options like A, B, and C, and the correct answer might be as few as one of them, at least one is going to be correct, or maybe all three of the answer choices are going to be correct here. So be prepared for those types of questions as well. It's kind of like a series of true-false questions if you think about it. You just have to get every single one of those true-false questions right in order to pass that question. And then finally, well, this is kind of a paper example. There are some questions where you enter in a numeric response. Now, I don't think this is the way that it looks like if you're taking it on a computer. I think there's just a box where you type in the number, but honestly not 100% sure on this. This is what you would see on a piece of paper, though. You'd have to very awkwardly kind of circle or fill in the numbers that matched up right. And this is one reason why practice is really important. If you show up not even knowing that this is a thing and you try to complete a question like this, you're going to be wasting a lot of time just figuring out what am I even supposed to do to answer this question. So if you're thinking about joining us for that Masters in Business Analytics program, we've won that National Smith Prize here, world renowned at this point, very fantastic program. You want to make sure that you're saving as much money as you can. You're getting as much bang as for your buck. Doing as well on the GRE as possible is kind of your way of saving a lot of money. And so you want to just put in enough work to be able to boost up your score by as much as probably where you think it really should be. This GRE exam is not the easiest. You're going to not score the very first time as well as you think you're going to score or hope you're going to score. As you're working through those practice exams, it just takes a lot of work. So plan to spend about 20 hours, maybe 1.5 hours a week for 2 weeks. And I think with that practice, dedication, persistence, steadfastness, all those great quantities employers always want, I think you'll be on your way to a winning score. So good luck studying and good luck getting those exam scores in. You can always retake the exam if you're not happy with it, but good luck.